Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers, here to talk Seahawks football. We have spent the last, 3.5 months, Keith, talking about draft prospects, a little bit of the free agency stuff, but more or less, we've been all in on getting ready for the 2025 NFL draft, which is the weekend after this next weekend coming up. And so we've just been constantly talking about prospects, and it's been never ending. And now we're finally getting fairly close to having this thing all wrapped up and actually talking about Seahawks players after the draft. What we wanted to do in this show, I think, is kind of go through our thinking on draft strategy in general. Different draft strategies that GM John Schneider would be employing, taking a look at, considering at all levels of the draft, how they approach the draft, how we approach the draft, what we would do if we were the GM, all that kind of stuff. And just based on our years of experience in doing this for a long time, just kind of imparting, what we've seen, some of the wisdom on how you take a look at the draft, and not get overly anxious or excited about players going at different spots in the draft. And so it's really easy to get caught up in taking a look at all the mock drafts and the big boards and where players are supposed to be drafted, and getting to the draft and having those dreams and expectations crushed, which happens every single year, and wondering why we reached for a player at 18 that we could have got, at 30 or 32 or whatever. And we're going to just talk about all that and kind of a free-flowing, no notes conversation. How you doing, Keith? Welcome in. Hope you're doing well. And what did you want to get started with today?
Well, I think what you were just talking about is a great place to start, is that what the draft media sees and has is not necessarily what the NFL teams have. NFL teams have a much more complete picture of players because they get to do the medical evaluations and the interviews and some of the background checks kind of stuff that the draft media doesn't do. And the other part of it is that there's a bit of echo chamber within the draft media where one guy starts jumping up and down about a certain player and everyone kind of takes notice and he goes up on everybody's big board. And that's not necessarily how it works in the NFL. They do their own evaluations. And so sometimes you'll have, think back to Bruce Irvin. The Seahawks took him at 12. I think it was 12. Maybe they had 12 and
15, I think.
Yeah, they dropped back to 15 and then took him. And people were flipping out, talking about he was a second round or a third round pick and whatever. And then come to find out that the Jets, which picked at 16 or 17, were ready to take him. So if the Seahawks wanted him, and they did, they picked him in the right spot. Yeah. And so it's one of those things where take the draft media stuff, including Bill and I, as far as our projections, with a grain of salt, because we have an incomplete picture of these prospects. And I think that fans lose track of that, and they see these projections and they think that this is set in stone. But the NFL teams have more information than we do.
Yeah. I'll just mention one player that kind of comes to mind when you're saying all that is Jalen Milroe. Here's a quarterback out of Alabama. And for months now, he's really kind of taken hits as far as his draft value, where he's at on the big board. It's always somewhere between the, mid to late second round, early third round. And I always thought that was too late. Considering this draft class, you consider a whole bunch of things when you're considering prospects. and where they should go in a draft and so forth. And it really has a lot to do with the draft class as a whole. For example, this year, the big idea in general terms is there's 12 to max 15 first round graded players or blue chip players in this draft. Or if you want to even differentiate that, there's 15 first round grades in this draft class. Maybe there's 10 blue chip players, right? And Seahawks are sitting at 18, which means in all likelihood, or a slim chance that maybe somebody falls, they're not going to have a first round grade player to choose from at 18. And they'll start, who's their best player available on their board that's got a second round grade, that then at least internally, they'll feel like we need to try to move off 18, move back, gain another pick, and have similar value the way that they see the board. There could be a situation where a player like Will Johnson, cornerback out of Michigan, falls, for example, and they really think that he's a blue chip player, had a little injury, and that's why he's falling a little bit. And they have a chance to take him, and they do. And it maybe surprises everyone that they chose a corner when they really didn't need a corner immediately on the roster. And the Seahawks said, we don't care. We're just going to take the best player on our board, best player available. And the differentiator is that free agency is about filling holes, and the draft is about acquiring talent. And that's the big thing that I think overarching needs to be paid attention to for fans. Is this is about acquiring talent. And it doesn't matter necessarily if you've got two really good solid starters as corners on your team. If you can acquire a third one, and rosters change all the time. Tariq Woolen's on a 1-year deal, essentially. We already established Job is coming back, but he's essentially on a 1-year deal as well, as a restricted, or just a 1-year deal. He didn't sign his restricted contract. So cornerback is a need. So it wouldn't shock me. And at that level of the draft too, at 18, it's a positional value that makes a lot of sense too. But I was getting back to Jalen Milroe. You had mentioned we don't have the whole picture. We don't have all of the things that GMs have and teams have access to. And he's a good example of a player that I think teams value his skill set and upside more than fans do, as far as seeing the flaws in his throwing specifically, and short to middle of the field is where he struggles the most. GMs look at that and say, my goodness, this is a generational talent with his legs. He operates a really, decent system as far as what he operated there at Alabama. And he just needs to work on some fundamentals, some technique, and some structural things about the way that he operates. And we can fix that. We can address that. We've got good quarterback coaching, good offensive coordinator. He spends some time in our team, may not be a year one starter, but his upside is better than any other quarterback in the draft. And I'm not saying for me, I'm just saying a GM might feel that way, and they'll go pluck him out in the first round because that's where they see his value. So it's, and their fan base will kill him. Right.
Yeah. He's an interesting guy as far as like evaluation, because I've seen him go in the first round. He as the third quarterback taken, and I've seen him sitting there in round 4 as the 5th or 6th quarterback taken. And he's all over the place. If you go look at mock drafts and evaluations, like the consensus big board has him right now 4th or 5th behind, the two of the top, Jackson Dart, and maybe, who's the other one? Quinn Ewers. Yeah. And
Tyler Shugg and Will Howard, Quinn Ewers, all that. Yeah. But Jalen Milroe's currently ranked 4th at 41 overall, which is about as high as he's been this offseason.
But he's bounced around. as people update, big boards and whatnot. And I don't think anyone really has an idea of where to put him. It's just one of those things where he does have some deficiencies as a thrower. And so where does he go? And I think that there's so much uncertainty by the draft media that you see him all over the place. And that's going to lead to fans, just hating on a general manager when he's taken. He
Right.
may end up being the best quarterback in this draft. I mean, there's
Maybe.
the top of this draft with Cam Ward and Shador Sanders is not, those aren't sure things. They really aren't. You may end up with a guy like Jackson Dart or a guy like, Jalen Milroe being the best quarterback in this draft class.
And we've seen it year after year, Keith. It's possible that happens. Nobody really fell in love with Jalen Hurts when he was drafted.
No, he's a second round pick, and people were like, "Oh, why did they take him so early? They already have their quarterback and whatnot."
Yes.
And what happened there? Well, the guy they liked basically fell off a cliff and
Right.
in terms of his production and went from being great to awful in a season. And Hurts came in and did some things and just continued getting better until he was the franchise quarterback there. And nobody knew that he was going to do that, but he did.
Jalen Milroe, when you take a look at the advanced stats, he's got some bad throws, but he's also got some really good throws. And
his deep throws are pretty.
In that playoff game, I can't remember who it was against, but he threw like a 75-yard touchdown, walk-off touchdown pass that was just amazing. And he's a 65% completion guy, and his QBR rating is, I think, ranked 4th in the draft class. So he's not horrible. It's just, there are some things that are tough, that are an issue for him. And I just wanted to mention him too, because he is a quarterback that Seattle put on their 30 visits. And there's something there. They don't waste those visits. Those are to clear up some things, check on medicals, find out if he's a good fit in the building, all that kind of stuff. So
if the Seahawks took Milroe at round 2, let's say he's sitting there at 50 or 52 and they snag him, I wouldn't hate that. I really wouldn't, because they've got a guy on the roster who can play this year. And if he does well, then Milroe gets to sit for a year and just learn. And if things go south, okay, get him on the field and let him play when these games don't matter anymore, because they've already lost a lot of games and it's over. And see what you've got there. This is a great situation for a guy like Milroe, because he doesn't have to come in and be ready week 1. I wouldn't hate them going after a guy with that much physical upside.
Yeah. You got to trust the process. You just do it at certain points. Okay. So Seattle had a pretty decent free agency offseason. I think the big thing was acquiring Sam Darnold. Obviously that made Geno Smith, that whole thing kind of work. Geno Smith was traded before Darnold hit free agency. And as soon as free agency happened, Sam Darnold was signed the first day there. So DK Metcalf is gone. It's kind of a remaking of the roster. Those guys,
the offensive roster.
Yeah, you don't hear a lot about this, but underneath the hood a little bit, there was some disgruntled type stuff going on, and those guys are no longer on the roster. I think if Seattle wanted them truly, they would be on the roster. They weren't terribly unaffordable. It's just, DK Metcalf's contract was a little out there, but so we got Darnold, Cooper Kupp comes in, DeMarcus Lawrence, Scantling. That's about it as far as starter level players. We re-signed Ernest Jones. Jerron Reed came back. We gave him a 1-year deal to Josh Jobe. And then we've got the draft. So talk to me a little bit about how you see the first round. We've talked a lot about prospects throughout this draft prospect series that we created for each position group. Talk to me about how you see it playing out for Seattle. If there's a chance that they move up, what's the chance that they drop back what is the chance of a player potentially falling to them that they can't leave the draft without and stick and pick?
Well, there's a lot to that question. So the one thing with that you were talking about, with all the free agency stuff that you didn't mention because it didn't happen, and that was an offensive lineman or two. This is a team that's offensive line was awful last year and really held this team back. And some of that was because of offensive coordinator and coaching issues, but it was still bad and it held the team back. And so everyone expected them to go get an offensive lineman, and it never happened. And now everyone's going to expect them to go get an offensive lineman in round one. And if you're listening to this, I hope that you're prepared for them not to go get one.
Yeah.
Tackles you can go get in the first round, but guards and centers, which is what Seattle needs, John Schneider believes you can get those a little later. You don't have to go first round for that. And he's not wrong. Guards and centers tend to go a little bit later. And so if you're willing to spend a second round pick on one, you might get a really good one. And
now, I will say this though, Keith, if it lined up where the position and the value and the player all lined up at 18, he would take one. I don't think that he would rule that out.
But I don't see a guard or a center worthy of the 8th overall pick
18th.
In this draft class.
Right. Yes.
Unless you look at one of the tackles as a conversion project, or
agreed.
Or you look at one of the tackles as we're going to play him in guard in year 1 and then move him outside for year 2 type of situation. But you're not drafting a guard. You're drafting a long term. You're drafting a tackle. So I don't see them taking one at 18. Now, it's weird because people look at and talk about this and they criticize, well, how can you only have 15 first round grades if there's 32 first round picks? And that's because the grades, when you go through and you do this evaluation, is dependent on the player, right? It's all about skill set, projection in terms of production and where they're going to be on the field, and you might have 15 players that reach a certain threshold, and that's what you define as a first round grade. And if all of those players are gone when it's time for Seattle to pick, what that's saying is that they're picking a guy at 18, middle of the first round, that they have a second round grade on, that they think is not an immediate impact like a Pro Bowl level player.
It may not be as good, at least at the beginning, of their current rostered player at that particular position.
Yeah.
And I was just listening to a podcast with Daniel Jeremiah and Dane Brugler.
Mm-hmm.
And they were talking about this very same thing. Yeah. And they were
there's a couple of really smart draft guys.
And they were talking about the shelf here and the players that you're going to be acquiring after pick 12 even in this draft. And a lot of the talent is good role-playing talent. A couple of potential stars, but potential is the key word there. Mm-hmm. No guarantees. And so you're basically just trying to add to your roster and best player available. And there's a lot of that in this draft. There's a lot of players between 15 and 75 that I like that are going to come in and immediately affect your roster in a positive way.
The 18th player in this draft and the 50 or 52nd player in this draft, which is Seattle's first pick and their second and third pick in this draft, the difference in talent and what you can expect year one from those three players is minimal.
Depending on the
18
position.
and 52. Well, yeah, depending on position. But as far as like value, there is not a lot at the very, very top of this draft. And there is a ton just below them.
Yeah. So they were talking about players like Shamar Stewart and Mike Green and Mikhail Williams, and a couple of the other guys, Derek Harmon, Walter Nolan, all those kind of guys, right? Mm-hmm. First round guys. Everyone mocks these guys in the first round. They're going to go in the first round. But they mentioned specifically Boye Mafe. And they were like, are any of these rush guys off the edge better than Boye Mafe? Are
They're
they
not.
better? Right. And the way Seattle approaches their draft is they create their own board and they have their own rostered players on that board and they comp them to players they're considering. And that's kind of how that helps them evaluate. And so I found that really interesting. It's like, well, you hear about these players and it's almost in a silo. There's nothing to compare to. You're just hearing a whole bunch of guys and us included talk about these players, their attributes. Usually we focus on all the positives, right? We don't talk about a lot of the negatives. That's just the nature of our particular show. We're not evaluating a bunch of tape over and over again and focusing on negative things. But, these guys have enough drawbacks where there's reasons why they're, slotted at different spots in the draft. But I just found that process interesting. So,
well,
okay,
and I
so
think one
in
of
the
the things
first round, Keith.
one of the things, so back in my sports writing days when this was my thing and how I what I did to get paid, there was this thought process, and it actually came from Schneider originally, was focus on what a player can do, not what he can't do. Find players with really unique traits that do one thing extremely well and get them on the roster, because let a creative coaching staff figure out how to maximize that talent. And the best example was a player that they didn't draft, but it came with the roster, Red Bryant, who was considered just a bust and was probably, done in the NFL, even though he was such a great guy in the locker room and a captain and all those things. But he just offered them very little on the field. And they took this guy that they thought was going to be a nose tackle at 335 and moved him to defensive end, where guys max out, in a 4-3 at like, 275. And you're like, why would you put a guy that big with no pass rushing ability whatsoever at defensive end? Well, it's because there are things that he did uniquely well, and his ability to do them against tackles that are used to facing smaller guys, and now they're just getting overwhelmed by this behemoth. It made for a great run defense, and it was something so unique that the rest of the NFL had to stand up and take notice. And so when you and I do evaluations, we focus a lot on what do they do really well and what do their physical attributes project that they can learn and get better at and also do well. We do kind of skip over some of the negatives because
Yeah,
honestly,
we do.
What do they do well? And how can you use that? Those are things that are really important to this evaluation, and a good coaching staff will take advantage of that. And so, yeah, I mean, that is kind of how we do it. But when you look at a guy like Nick Inamori, who you and I've talked about, kind of ad nauseum, safety, Cam Chancellor size, but with way more speed. He's not a guy who's going to have a first round grade. He isn't, because he's not a first round player. He's got all pro potential and a guy that you'd love to have on your roster just because he's a freaking unicorn, as guy being that big, that strong, and that fast for that position. But if you look at the things he doesn't do well, like cover, you're going to think, do you really want him? Yeah, you absolutely want him. Focus on what he does well. Focus on what he can learn to do because of his just incredible athleticism.
His traits, sure.
Yeah, but that doesn't give him a first round grade because he can't come in and play at that level today. Right?
So, yeah, I agree with all that. So let's focus just for a minute on pick 18. Seattle sitting at 18. They don't trade up.
I think they could trade up in this because they have so
could
many
trade
picks.
Up.
They have so many picks. They have 10 picks. They have 5 in the top 100. And if there's 15, 12 first round grades, blue chip players, and you're sitting at 18, one of them drops to 15. Why not
So
move up and
there's
get them
okay.
rather than
So
wait?
let's talk about that. Let's talk about that for a second. They're at 18. What would it take to move up to, let's say, 12? Somebody has fallen out of the top 10 that they thought was going to go in the top 10. Let's identify a couple of players that they would move up for. Let's talk about Membu. Now, it's likely he's going to go in the top 8.
Top
But if he should
5.
fall out of 10, there may be incentive to go get him. Tyler Warren, the tight end, along with Colston Loveland, I think would potentially get them to move. Jalen Walker, I think is a player that they may decide to move for. Another player is, they had Mikael Williams on as far as an edge rusher on their 30 visits. Another guy is Jihad Campbell, who some project to go maybe earlier than you'd like because he's a middle linebacker, but he does a lot of things beyond that really well. What player could you identify that Seattle would move for, and what would the compensation look like?
Well, and that's while you were talking, I'm like, ooh, I should pull up the trade chart. If Seattle wanted to move from 18 to 12, right? The difference there is 300 points on the updated trade chart.
So the third
52,
rounder?
well, 52, which is what Seattle had, is 380. 300 is actually pick 58. So still in round 2.
Wow.
So you're probably going to have to give up 52 and then also get back
Maybe.
something that's worth, around
Or a future.
80. Yeah, either
Yeah,
that
I would be willing to give up an 80, either the 82 or 92 and a future third round pick. I mean, that's what I would try to do if I could get
but if
a
you could
GM
give
to
up
bite.
if you could give up 52, so you'd give up 18 and 52 to get 12 and let's say,
A fourth rounder or something.
110. That's a fourth round pick.
Yeah.
Are you willing to do that?
What am I getting? What am I going for, Keith?
Well, I think at that point you're looking at, okay, what are you going for? You're going up for Aron Memba, who is dropped for reasons we're not quite sure, and is sitting there at 12 instead of going top 8 like you expect. Or Will Johnson is hanging on and is there. Maybe Kelvin Banks, the tackle out of Texas,
I don't know if I'd
is
move
a
up
guy.
for Kelvin Banks, but okay. Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like, it depends
Sure.
on what their evaluation is.
I think an
Yeah.
underdog to move up for would be like a Colston Loveland. There's part of me after doing all the evaluations in the draft and stuff. I know tight end, right?
I'd hate that.
But the tight end position is so important to this scheme. I can't even tell you. Like it.
Yeah, but the
12
drop-off from
personnel is used like 75% of the time.
The drop off from Colston Loveland to, Elijah Arroyo is very little, but you're probably talking two rounds worth of, or even Mitchell Evans down in round 4.
Listen, there's certainly tight ends, Keith, that do 80% of what Colston Loveland does, but also Colston Loveland can be special, and I think is one of the blue chip players in this draft. Man, dude, we just haven't spent a lot of time.
Tyler Warren,
Tyler Warren is amazing.
Tyler Warren is a guy that's worthy of a first round pick. Colston Loveland, I don't have a first round grade on him. I think he's probably the 28th best player in this draft.
I think he's one of the blue chip guys in this draft, to be completely honest.
I seriously don't.
I do.
I think Tyler Warren's the only.
You're going to get pushback. You're going to get some pushback.
I can't get pushback. That's fine. It's absolutely, people disagree with me. I'm just saying.
I think that's one of the players.
I am perfectly comfortable with people disagreeing with me. I see different things than other people see when it comes to doing the scouting, and I don't give a damn what other draft scouts think of guys. I do my own evaluations. And I don't think that Colston Loveland is an elite prospect. I think he's a first, like, he's probably going to go 28th overall. He's going to be a first round pick. I'm not saying he's bad. He's great. But he's not Tyler Warren, and he's not a blue chip instant potential Pro Bowler. That's my evaluation of him. Elijah Arroyo, on the other hand, who is currently on the consensus big board at 56, has more athletic upside and freaking dominated Senior Bowl practices. And no one's talking about him. But you could get him late second round.
I know,
and I
but
think he
Colston
has
Loveland started like 36 straight games. Go look at Arroyo and tell me what you think on his availability.
No, I know what you're saying. I get that part, but I'm just saying, like, is the drop off, if you're talking about you were saying mid first round to slightly early first round, all the way back to mid second round, is that entire round worth of draft capital worth the difference in player from Arroyo to Loveland? So Loveland's the better player. He's a better prospect.
Depends.
But
it really depends on the way that the team evaluates and so forth, and if they identify him as a player that they think is a blue chip that is got a first round grade for them. Arroyo's got the second or mid second round grade. There's a difference there, but you're right in that you have to evaluate the value and what it costs to make that trade and so forth. All of that, I get that.
Yep.
I think it's more likely to be a defensive end or a cornerback that they would move up.
Absolutely, I would agree. A defensive player it is much more likely. And you mentioned the cornerback. Who was it? It was Will Johnson from Michigan, and that's a guy that honestly, one, could be there and be, where they could move up to get him, and that would be great value. Like that's almost an ideal combination of is there and worth the picks to go to move up to get him. Maybe Jalen Walker, the pass rusher out of Georgia.
He's unique. He's very unique. He's going to play all over the place for you. He's a guy that could play a little bit of linebacker, a little bit of edge, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Mike McDonald loved that player. I can guarantee you that he would be on their board, and if he's there, they would go up to the podium for that. So let's talk about what they would go to the podium for at 18.
They would run to the podium for a guy like that. Now at 18, I mean, Jahad Campbell comes to mind. If you don't think that Knight is your long-term starter at middle linebacker, if you look at him and you're like, physically there are things to be that worried. You've got Jones, but maybe Knight is better as your third guy. He could definitely be a guy that teams think of. I think if they go at 18, if they stick and pick, I would see them looking at a guy like Matthew Golden, the wide receiver out of Texas, to come in and be a guy that could replace a lot of what DK Metcalf did and be just an instant upgrade, and just a difference maker. He would make a lot of sense there. That's actually where I would see Colston Loveland maybe going to Seattle, or if they drop down to 23, which is a common trading destination with Green Bay.
I think Colston Loveland's gone before Seattle picks at 18.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think he goes somewhere in the 10 to 12 range, I think.
He's been there in almost every mock draft I've done.
Huh.
He's been available. Yeah. Almost every mock draft I've done, he's been sitting there at 18, and I trade down anyway.
I've heard a lot about Emeka Egbuka at wide receiver, just because of the leadership traits, the football player traits,
I like
all
him.
of
I like
those
him a
kind of
lot.
qualities.
I really
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
He's a guy that I could get behind as like this kid's gonna be good. And I love the fact that he can just flat out run. Um, like he can get downfield as fast as anybody. He's gonna stretch a defense. Um, yeah, I think Matthew Golden's probably a better overall prospect. But whatever. If you get Egbuka instead, you're you're in great shape. Um,
Let's
if
talk about a player that we have not talked about for a long time, not since we did the quarterback evaluation.
Mhm.
What do you think about Jackson Dart to the Seahawks at 18? Now, I know, hear me out. There's a lot of arguments against, right? And we've been very active in free agency, building our room and all that, right? But here's an opportunity, and maybe that's the play that John Schneider would have you believe, that Seattle has solved their quarterback room at least for 2 years, and they're not looking. And then all of a sudden, boom, they draft Jackson Dart at 18. Would that just freak you out, or
No.
what would that do to your overall draft strategy?
Does that make the Seahawks significantly better in 2025? No. But I wouldn't bat an eye at Jackson Dart at 18 because this is a potential franchise quarterback. Um, is he a guy like Sanders or Ward that's going to move around and give you even Jalen Monroe, who is going to give you that um, dynamic ability with his legs and all of that? No. But what he
I
is,
will
he's
say he
more.
is underrated as far as
He is,
moving around
but
and toughness.
he's not going to get you yards. You're not going to run quarterback power with him like you might with Cameron Ward. Um, or a quarterback sweep like you might with Milrow or Sanders. He's more of a pocket passer, but he moves around the pocket really well in order to avoid pressure and all that kind of stuff. So um, he's a passer. He's not an athlete. He's a passer and a really freaking good one. And if the Seahawks evaluate him, and I gotta tell you, like Schneider's um, track record on quarterbacks is a lot better than some fans want to give him credit for. I mean, evaluating Russell Wilson in the third round was brilliant. The fact that he was willing to consider moving on from Wilson in the height of Wilson's um like production and everything to go get Josh Allen, the guy in Buffalo, um, that bears out as being like, wow, that would have actually worked out really well for Seattle.
Right.
Even though people like roasted him at the time. When he goes after a guy, it's been he's been right about quarterbacks. He evaluates quarterbacks really well. I think that the fact that he was trying really hard to trade up last year for um, the kid out of Washington, and then didn't get him, should tell everyone that one, he didn't think wonders about Geno Smith, but also they really wanted that particular kid. Which I say kid, but he was actually one of the older quarterbacks in the draft. Um,
So let's do this, Keith.
so
Let's talk about really quick and finish out the first round stuff here. Let's talk about one last player. We both feel like after evaluating this entire class and looking at the board and looking how the draft would potentially fall, that Seattle is less than likely to take a offensive lineman.
yes,
Even though that seems to, with left guard in particular, is the one position I think heading into the draft that Seattle hasn't solved for yet. If you take a look at their roster, we've got starters at every other position except for left guard. Let's talk about Gray Zabel, because it's a polarizing. Yeah, it's a polarizing. Well, he
he's a
could
center.
potentially play guard.
you could play him at guard for a year and let him learn the speed of the NFL and that kind of sense and everything. And he is actually, if you look at NFL mock draft database, he's the consensus pick for the Seahawks at 18.
And that's why I want to talk about him. Just for the obvious reasons.
So
and
this
I
is
want
a
to
guy
talk about
who
an
was
obvious player, but it
he was
doesn't
a
make a lot of
tackle
sense to
in
me.
college at North Dakota State. He's going to move inside because he doesn't have the length to play tackle, but he's got the athleticism. Looks great. Plays really, really smart. He's a center at the next level. He might start at guard for a year, but his future is at center because that's athletically who he is, and football smarts, that's who he is. He should be at center. And if you're drafting him thinking he's going to be your center for the next decade. If the Seahawks do that at 18 and use that to solve their left guard spot this year, move him into center, it gives them another year to find and figure out the guard positions and
Or he's
whatnot.
so good at left guard, you leave him there. One of the two.
I think he's more valuable at center. But most people would say that left guard is more valuable than center. Fine. I just think that his NFL IQ is high enough that having him at center is worthwhile, but whatever.
Okay. So
If they go with him, I would be ecstatic. Most fans would be ecstatic. The likelihood that happens at 18 is minuscule.
Okay. So let's
Now with
talk
John
about
Schneider in charge of things.
let's talk about the draft strategy of moving off 18 if you can. Find a trading partner. They've got a lot of prospects on their board between 18 and let's just say 30, 35 that are somewhat equal value. They've got a lot of prospects they could pick from. They find a trading partner. They move back to 23, 25, something like that. They make a selection. Don't know exactly what that would be, but they're good with that. Let's talk about now how that might affect later round strategy. Let's talk about the second round. They could certainly stick and pick at 50 and 52. Is there a player that we're not considering or a lot of fans don't consider because when they do their mock drafts, once we pick at 18, our next pick is at 50, there's a whole bunch of players that fly off the board consistently and you never really get a chance to draft any of those guys. Is there a player that we're not currently considering that we should be considering and the potential for moving up off of 50 back up into the top end of the second round to go grab a player?
Yes, there are actually quite a few that the Seahawks might target. Siobhan Revel Jr., the quarterback out of East Carolina.
Talked about him a lot the last show.
We've talked about him a lot recently because he was a guy that had top 15 cornerback written all over him.
He's a 30 visit player as well.
Yep. Maybe a wide receiver like Emeka Ibuka, if he falls and is available in the 30s. Luther Burden, wide receiver out of Missouri, is a guy that I could see being the guy, and I think people would hate that, but I don't. And then you start looking at defensive players, and Kenneth Grant, the defensive tackle out of Michigan, would be like such a tremendous fit in Seattle that I could see them moving up for him. And these are guys that, are they worth moving up for from 50? Yes. I mean, they really are. And especially if let's say they move down from 18 to 23, right? That's like I said, that's kind of like the sweet spot as far as trade value. You get a third round pick for that. And maybe a fifth round pick, or six, somewhere in there. You can then package that same pick with 50 and move up to like 38. And get a guy that you really like Revel
now,
Jr.
for me,
or Luther Burden, Josh Conley.
Now, I think
Jr.
Gray Zabel is probably going to go in the first round, but there are some really solid guys like Brugler who think that Gray Zabel is going to be a early second round pick. And
Benjamin
that
North
would be a reason to move up. Now, I think that is a better value equation for me, going to 35 or 38 for a guy like Gray Zabel or a guy like Tyler Booker or
If you can get him
there's a
in the
bunch of
30s,
players.
that's a tremendous get. That's a steal. Um, but honestly, I would be if they're trading up. I mean, a guy like uh, Azare Thomas, the cornerback out of Florida State, would be really interesting for if they
Hmm.
moved up to like 38. And it's
Hmm.
not a guy that you and I talk about because he always tends to fall
Hmm.
outside of where Seattle's picks, right? Between 18 to 23, wherever the Seahawks pick, and 50. He typically goes like 38 to 42.
And you've talked about Elijah Arroyo quite a bit on this show. That would be a reason to move up, maybe to
Yeah,
go grab him.
I
You've
like
heard
him
as a
more than
general
most people
manager.
do. I
Yeah.
probably like him more than I should. Um, I don't know. There's just something about him that jumps out at me,
Well,
and
how
I
about
just think
like a
he'd be
wide
fun.
receiver like Jaden Higgins? Maybe
Yes,
they're
a
really
guy.
high on Jaden Higgins and they
God,
need to move
Jaden
up. They
Higgins would be
know he's
fun
not going to
too.
be there. There's a couple of teams that they know are
That
really in on
speed,
him and they jump a team to go get him. I would like that pick.
that speed at that height, instant deep threat. Like, go get him.
Yes.
Just do it. Just do it. That'd be fun. What the
I
hell?
really like Tyleek Williams, the defensive tackle from Ohio State. I would consider moving up for him. A guy like Mason Taylor, the tight end, is another player that maybe they identify. Maybe it's Jalen
I think.
Milroe, right? Maybe they move up for a quarterback.
Hmm.
I don't know.
Maybe they move
It's
up
just an interesting proposition.
for a guy like Xavier Watts or Darius Alexander.
Or
I
Donovan Jackson, the lineman out of Ohio State.
Yeah,
That's a spot
actually,
where you gotta go get your lineman that you identify. We talk about the draft strategy show. This is a part of the draft where linemen start flying off the board
yeah.
because a lot of
Donovan Jackson
linemen
would be
don't have
interesting.
those first round grades. They start piling up here, and you go get the first one on anybody's board would be kind of that sort of scenario. Zabel, if he's there at 33 or 34, you go get him. Donovan
Tyler
Jackson,
Booker,
Tyler
Donovan
Booker, those sorts of
Jackson.
players. Yeah, right.
Yeah, those are the guys that all of them have grades that you'd expect them to go somewhere at the end of the first round, like from somewhere between pick like 27 and maybe like 35. And if two of them go, you move up to get the third one because they're the best interior linemen in this draft.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about picks 50 and 52. If we don't move up, we've got 50 and 52. There's a
Hmm.
lot of good players available, but I think there is a little bit of a shelf. I think there's a shelf in the first round after 10. I think there's a shelf after
I'm gonna say
45 or
12, but
so in
yeah.
this draft. Okay, 10,
Hmm.
12. At about 45, some of the premier kind of second tier players start to wean out a little bit. And then you're drafting good qualities like starter level players, but maybe you're missing a couple of pieces, a
Yeah.
couple of traits that you like. They're going to be nice rotational pieces, but what do you do at 50 and 52? Let's just say they go defense first pick. What are you trying to do at 50 and 52 to ensure that your roster is taking shape?
Well, this is where I would look for the CX to fill in a spot where we would naturally think they don't have a need. Landon Jackson, who's an edge player, they've already got 4 edges. Why would they need another one? Because you've got players that are good enough to justify that pick and will force themselves on the field. Maybe a defensive lineman like Darius Alexander out of Toledo, or um,
Yeah.
you know,
TJ
Ariante
Sanders. Right.
Ercere out of Minnesota. Well, he's an offensive lineman, but he's a guy that I have in that range. That would be like a really interesting pick for the Seahawks to go. Xavier Watts, tight end out of Notre Dame. These are guys that like safety. You don't think the Seahawks need a safety? They've got 2 starters.
Right.
Edge player, they're 4 deep.
Now,
But
one thing to watch for,
if you see a guy with starter quality still sitting there at 50, even if you don't need the position because you've got guys, it's not going to stop you from taking him.
now,
Zare Thomas, if he's sitting there at 50 and they don't run up and take him, I would be surprised.
one of the things that people need to consider is we have picks 50 and 52, and then we don't pick again until 82, right?
Mhm.
So there's a little gap there. So that means that anybody really on a big board that is going to be picked between 52 and 80 is on their board in that selection area. If they want to get a player and their pick is at 52 that they know is going to go before they pick again, they either can try to trade back or they kind of go reach and get a guy. What would really upset you about them doing that? And what player would you hate to see them reach for at 52?
I feel like you're setting me up. Because you know
I'm not. I haven't overthought.
I'm going to mention a player that you love and I don't. If at 52,
Tyler Shuck.
If they at 52, if they draft the 43-year-old Tyler Show instead of a player that might actually have an NFL career, I will probably vomit somewhere. And you will actually be ecstatic and happy and jump up and down. And I don't know that I would
be ecstatic and happy and jump up and down. It's hard to do that when you know a player's not going to impact your roster the first year. It's just hard.
Think about a couple minutes ago about what I said about trusting Schneider and quarterbacks. And if he drafts Tyler Show, he's probably the only quarterback in this draft that I won't give him the benefit of the doubt on. And that's not because you love him. It's really not. It's just it happens to be that way. But he's a guy that I would just be like, no. What? Really?
Yeah. So, I think one of the players that I would have a hard time with would be a guy like Jared Wilson. Offensive center, literally ranked the second best center in this draft, which tells you how poor the center position in this draft is behind, the player that everyone wants us to draft, Greg Zabel. And if they go, and he's projected to go in the third round, but if they, go up and get him middle of the second round, he's not even a player that you can honestly say is going to come out of the draft and start for you. At 50 or 52, you really kind of want a player that is still going to make a significant impact.
Is he better than Oluwatimi?
Exactly. That was what I was going to get to.
I don't know if that's true, and Oluwatimi is not good.
Well, he's not bad. He's just not great.
He's not good.
He had a 65 grade overall on PFF. I mean, it's not bad.
He does some things well and gets absolutely ran over at other times.
I am actually looking forward to him in this new scheme and new coaching staff this year.
I think he'll be better as a run blocker in this new scheme. He is built to be an outside zone blocker, not an inside zone blocker. And so I think it fits him a lot better. But as a pass blocker, he will always be susceptible to a bull rush. And the good bull rushers, the power rushers in this league are going to eat him up. And it doesn't matter what scheme you run.
I would rather get his teammate Tate Ratledge at 52 and roll the dice with Tate there as a right guard and figure out Haynes later. One of the players that I would really love to see the Seahawks exit the draft with is Jack Besh, the wide receiver out of TCU. He just seems like a Seahawk, like a really good put together prospect on the field. He
reminds me of who was the Husky wide receiver that they drafted that stuck around forever, even though
Jermaine Kearse.
He reminds me a lot of Jermaine Kearse, but with more talent. And like actual playmaking ability. I'm going to piss off so many Seahawks fans with that.
It's funny that you said that out loud because I literally just watched the play in the Super Bowl where he was falling backwards and he caught the ball, fell onto his chest. I know
that was so like it was just the awareness of that. And then
the play in the Green Bay game.
Yeah, the game before
The
that,
game
he
winner.
caught the game winner, and people always point to those when I'm like, Curse was overrated.
Right.
You're right. He had some tremendous plays, and then he had so many plays where he just
Yeah.
stopped running, threw his hands up to beg for a call when no one touched him. Or
Yeah. There was some of that.
in the right after he made that play when he was laying on his back, was the play with that interception where his job was to stack the cornerback in his face so that way Malcolm Butler couldn't get to the football, and he stood there and didn't do anything. And Malcolm Butler cut right behind Brandon Browner and got to the football. Or the wide open and he drops the ball on the sideline in a way that would have given the team the win even before his earlier catch or his great catch on his back. And there's just so many plays like that that people forget because of the great plays that were there. This is a whole nother topic for another day. I consistently will have said since the day he became a Seahawk that I think the Seahawk fans overrate him because of where he went to school. Beck reminds me of him, but with more talent. He can
Yeah.
actually get open with more regularity than Curse ever could. And
So
I like him. I
okay,
really
so
do.
you've got
Jalen
50 and
Royals is a guy that I
52.
like actually more, though.
Yeah,
I
well,
don't
I
know
was
if
going to
that's gonna.
ask you. So you've got 80, 82, 92. Out of those areas of the draft, what is one player that you've really identified that you just really want the Seahawks to draft and don't want to leave the draft without?
Jalen Royals. If you don't have a wide receiver before 82 and Jalen Royals is still on the board, please draft him. Please, just do it. Take my word for it. I know
There's a lot of
they
people
don't give a
right
damn
now.
what I say, but I
There's a
like
lot
him
of
so
people right
much.
now that are talking about Kyle Williams, the wide receiver out of Washington State. We didn't talk about him too much, but
He's
boy, he's
so
getting a lot of.
tiny.
He is, but man, he's getting a lot of. He's
I
getting a
mean,
lot of press right now.
he is. I like him. I saw some. I don't remember who it was. Someone had him listed as the number 2 wide receiver in this draft class, and that shocked the hell out of me
Yeah,
because
I've seen some weird things about him where he's like a top 5 guy,
I'm
top
like,
5 wide receiver,
I'm
and
like,
even that is like, whoa.
yeah, I'm like, uh, he must have a great agent that is just selling him
I
because
think he's really good, though. I mean, the film
he
says he's
is
really
really
good. He's
good.
just small.
He is really good, and he does some things fantastically well. Um, and I mean, he's a Coug, so everyone, because I didn't like Jermaine Kearse, are always going to accuse me of overrating the Cougs and underrating the Huskies. But I see Kyle Williams as a guy that struggles in the NFL because he's so tiny. I think if he can return punts and stay healthy, and then that's going to extend his career. And I think as a slot receiver, he's got a lot of value if he can stay healthy. But I don't know. He's so tiny.
So I
I
want
would
to
have a
tell
lot
you
of
something
concern.
that I think that is really important.
Okay.
I have moved off of my Tyler Shuck bandwagon, and
Oh,
I've
good.
moved on to the Will Howard quarterback from Ohio
Interesting.
State bandwagon.
See, I thought you started there and
I
then moved
did
off of
start
him.
there long ago, like 3 months ago. And I
Uh-huh.
moved off him because, we talked about him, and then there's so many other players to talk about. We just never came back, right?
Uh-huh.
Because we started with that prospect group. And I liked him because I thought that he had a really decent collegiate career. I think he started at Duke or something like that, transferred, went to Ohio State, and had a really good year and a lot of big play moments, and took him to the national championship. And just, a lot of people don't give him credit because of the wide receiver room that they have there at Ohio State, and the
And the
offensive
offensive line
line
that they
and
have,
the
yeah.
running back. They had the duo of running backs that were just crazy good. And then here's Will
It's
Howard.
easy to look good with that much talent around you at quarterback. When you're a
Sure it is. But it's
quarterback.
also easy to look bad too, because if you are bad, you're
Yeah.
not going to play in that offense because of, so I think that, Who was the
I think,
John Gruden? So I sent you the John Gruden football camp, a link to a
mhm,
YouTube thing. And I don't know if you had a chance to watch it or not, but you watched some of that. Now I watched about 30 minutes of that. It's about an hour.
I did
And
not watch all
came
of
away
it.
so impressed with his processing, his ability to whiteboard a lot of things, his ability to banter and kind of really get into it with the coach there on that show, and just came away extremely impressed. And then went and watched some. I didn't watch film, bad plays, good plays. I watched some highlights, and I just came away thinking, there's something about that kid that is a fighter and a warrior that I wouldn't mind Seattle taking a shot at. Just he's not going to be like a world beater, I don't think. But you never know in the draft, right?
Here,
You just never know about some of
he's
these prospects.
he's 6'4", 236. He's big for that
Yeah,
position.
yeah.
He reminds me a
But
little
he likes
bit
to run
of
too.
Ben Roethlisberger, in where you see so many guys get hands on him and it doesn't freaking matter. And as much as I hated Ben Roethlisberger
Yeah,
because of
yeah.
what team he played for and him beating Seattle in the
And the
Super
kind of
Bowl,
human that he
uh,
was, apparently.
there's that. Will Howard has that kind of player in him. He's big, he's really strong, he's hard to get to the ground, and he's a good thrower. Uh,
Yeah.
I
Yes.
I think that he's a guy that I think he's currently underrated overall. I think Quinn Ewers is currently overrated overall. That's the guy out of
Mm-hmm.
Texas. But if I was
Texas.
to pick one of these mid-round quarterbacks that might develop into a guy that could turn into something not really nice, it would be Kyle McCord out of Syracuse. Um,
Yeah.
and he is
You
very,
mentioned that
very
the last time we talked about quarterbacks. You mentioned him.
yeah,
In fact, a
I
mock
think I had
draft,
him
right?
on a mock draft.
Yeah.
He's 6'3" and 220. He does not run well, but he is a pocket passer who's really accurate, short, very quick release. The ball gets out of his hand crazy fast, even at the college game, where that's not typically normal. Um, and just is really smart. The stuff he does pre-snap to identify where that ball needs to go is stuff that you see guys take 2 or 3 years in the NFL to develop, and he's doing it now. Um, he's never going to be, you know, an elite athlete at the position, but I think he can be a really good player. Um, a lot of dink and dunk kind of stuff because he gets the ball out of his hands super fast. But Tom Brady was a dink and dunk guy for most of his career. He just made really smart decisions and got the ball exactly where it needed to be when it needed to get there. And
Yeah.
McCord has that kind of game to him. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be that way because, you know, Brady's got 7 Super Bowls and McCord may end up being a long term backup, but he's of that same style of player. Um, and I think that he's underrated in this draft class.
So a couple of mid-round defensive guys I want to talk to, a couple of Midwest boys. Danny Stutzman, the
Mm-hmm.
linebacker out of the University of
Mm-hmm.
Oklahoma. I just like the way that he plays, kind of a throwback linebacker. He moves well in space, nails you when he sees the ball. He's going to come up and hit you hard, kind of establishes an identity for you on defense a little bit. And you're not going to have to start him right away, but he's going to be a real nice player for you for a long time, and special teams. And if anything happens to either one of our line off the ball linebackers, he could come in and take snaps at either spot. And the other player was like Ty Robinson, the defensive lineman out of Nebraska,
Mm-hmm.
a player I really like overall, and kind of fits their profile. He's coming in on a 30 man visit, and the kind of player that I think that they feel like fits their MO, the way that they like to run the business there. So how about you, defensive guys that you really kind of
Um,
like?
You were talking about linebacker, and that made me think of oh man, I just had the name and then lost it. Um, Demetrius Knight out of South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
As a guy, this is a downhill tackling machine. Though in much the same way that Tyrese Knight was coming out of or coming into the NFL out of the draft, reminds me very much of Tyrese Knight. And so I think that just for the sake of pissing off sports writers like I used to be and trying to figure out who was that made the tackle, having Knight and Knight in the middle would be hilarious. Because it's no longer me being stuck trying to figure that out. But
That'd be fun.
he's the right kind of player. This is a guy that's a tackling machine, comes downhill, loves to hit people right at the line of scrimmage. And I just like him. Also, let's see, in that same range. Let's see, defensive players.
I like Jordan Phillips, the defensive tackle. I'll just say that right now.
Yes, out of
Just
Maryland.
yeah,
I love him in there. Yes, that's another one of those guys. Maybe
and the team needs a true defensive tackle, a nose tackle, and I
a
think that
true nose tackle, and he
that
would
would be good.
definitely be it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, those are kind of the guys.
Okay.
Maybe Arianis Peebles, not Peoples, Peebles, out of Virginia Tech, but he's more of a gap penetrator than a true nose tackle. And they need a nose tackle more, but
Okay.
still a
So
guy I like.
let's round this thing out. So, we've talked about some players now. We've talked about earlier draft picks. How do you round this draft out in the fourth round, pick 137, all the way out? What are you trying to do?
Well,
What are you trying to do if you're a general manager with these sorts of picks?
so once you get after round 3 and you get down into round 4, there's a few guys that you look at that you compare to your roster and you go, they're better than who we have. Let's draft them and we'll have a new starter. But a lot of the guys that are there, if they're good enough to come in and do that, they don't have a high ceiling. They just happen to have a high floor. But what I look for when I get, especially in round 5 and beyond, is give me the really high ceiling guy that is just raw as hell. Get him in and let's coach him. This is where Cam Chancellor was drafted. This is where Richard Sherman was drafted. This is where just there's a lot of guys that the Seahawks
Will
have
Disley.
drafted. Will Disley was drafted in this range. And the lists go on. They really do. Because that's kind of what Schneider did, especially when the roster was good, is he would go after high ceiling players and be like, you know what? If they can learn, we can get them on the field and
Yeah.
their athleticism and stuff is going to be great. And if
I
they
think
don't,
Kobe Bryant was a fourth round pick,
yeah, that was a good one. And
AJ
then,
Barner just last year.
yeah, that's another one. And then Treek Woolen was a 5th round pick, who was actually the guy that my brain was trying to remember, even though we've been
Yes.
in the show.
Right. Right. So
Really,
yes. So
really
you can
high
really get some
ceiling,
diamonds here.
really high ceiling, but very low floor. Take shots on guys in rounds, rounds 4, 5, and 6, unless there's a guy that just instantly makes you better because you have nothing out of position.
So
And
for me,
if you're at this point and you have nothing out of position and you're in round 4, and you're through free agency and through the first 3 rounds, you're in trouble. But most of the time, just go find guys.
few guys on the offensive line that kind of would be in this range for me is Chase Lunt, the
Yep.
offensive lineman from UConn, Bryce Calabu from Kansas. Both of those players are in for 30 visits. They both fit kind of the scheme that we're looking at. Dylan Fairchild, who I don't think gets as much attention out of the lineman there from Georgia, Jared Wilson, and Tyler Booker. Not Tyler Booker. Who am I thinking of?
Jackson Slater out of Sac State.
Rutledge.
Oh yeah, Rutledge.
The
Rutledge
guy's
will be
from
gone
Georgia.
before
The
that.
guy's from
Rutledge will be
Georgia
gone
though, but
before
Dylan
that.
Fairchild is going to be in the 4th round ish
Yeah.
range. And they played together there. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of guys, I guess, that Seattle will be considering in this range, and it kind of fills out your roster. You're looking, like you mentioned right at the beginning of the show, about a statement that stuck with you that John Schneider made about finding guys that do one thing really well. And this is particularly true in this range of the draft, where you're drafting for traits as much as you're drafting for a football player.
Yeah. I mean, that's another way to put it. Go draft a really high ceiling guy. Even if they're not good right now, they have the potential to become very good if you're patient enough and you coach them, and they listen and they're willing to be coached. Go grab those guys, even if they're not great now. Another example, Byron Maxwell was a 6th round pick, late 6th round, by Schneider and company, that the dude wasn't even a starter in college.
I'm looking at him on my wall right now. I've got a picture of the Legion of Boom, and he's on there. Right here.
He was a freaking backup in college at his last year in college, but he was really good at special teams, and he had some really interesting physical traits. And Schneider liked him, and Pete Carroll looked and said, and Pete Carroll he knows defensive backs. It was like, we can mold this kid into something. So they took him with at the end of the 6th round. Pick, I don't know, I want to say like pick 202 or something like that. And then I read a thing that Richard Sherman wrote he was still playing with Seattle, but it was near the end. He wrote a thing, and he said that Maxwell, when he first got into town, was so inflexible he couldn't touch his toes.
Wow.
And so he had to go, like, did hot yoga and stuff, and worked with the trainers and worked with the other guys to help him improve his flexibility. And then suddenly, like, he was getting a lot more out of his athleticism, and looked really good, and earned himself a freaking starting job with the Seahawks, and then a contract out, after his contract with Seattle was up.
So this is a guy that came in and took over basically for Browner.
Yeah. And this was a guy who was not even a starter in college his last year. But he was viewed as a high ceiling guy. Someone who was identified, and they went and got him. And I love that. I love that story, because that is the draft. These are the stories out of the draft that I freaking love, because it's about, as an evaluator, knowing what you're looking for, knowing what you see, trusting your gut, and believing in guys, and then having those guys just like fight and claw and do whatever it takes to make the roster, and then work their asses off to become what they could be. And I freaking love that. It's just so humanizing of everything the NFL does. Those are the stories I love about the draft. So, yeah.
Okay, so let's wrap this thing up. Fun show. I love the conversation, just because it's unscripted, and we just kind of came in here and wing it a little bit. Our next couple of shows, we're going to take another look at prospects, but really focus in on the type of players at each position, both on offense and defense, that the Seahawks will have on their board. We believe they'll have on their board as Seahawky type prospects in this draft, and then after that, we are down to our last mock draft of the season early next week, and then we're going to come back and do a draft preview show for you right before the draft, and then we're going to get into it. We're going to make the picks, and we're going to come back and we're going to talk about it. We've also, just so you know, too,
the draft starts 1 week from today.
Yeah. We've been invited to go on the Hawk Zone podcast as well after cool. the draft, to evaluate all the picks. So we're going to do that as well. Maybe Sunday. Still working that out. So that's why I hadn't mentioned it to you yet. Anyway, Fun stuff. I mean, we're getting down to it. This is the best time of the year for me.
It is. This is
I
fantastic.
almost like this process better than I actually like watching the games at this point in my life, which is weird. Like I never thought I'd be that. At the end of the day, though, it is about football and about the games and the games being played. It is interesting. I think, since 2014, essentially when we really haven't been competitive at a Super Bowl level as a team and as a roster, you do have a tendency to kind of accept the level of play on the field for what it is. And you really try to put all of your energy, or at least I do, into the off season, into the roster building aspect, and try to figure it all out to help make your team better. And so I've kind of learned over time to find a lot of joy in that aspect of it, because you can find joy in all of that, and you don't have to be so good on the field and still come away being a fan of the team and of football and all that kind of stuff. So it helps, for me anyway, it's kind of therapeutic, and it helps round out it helps balance my expectation level for the season by doing all this kind of work. So, and that's kind of why we started the show, going way back, is we did it for us. It's like, we like to talk about football. We like to talk and go through all this process as a year-round kind of a thing, and it's been a great outlet. So,
yeah, it's been fun.
Anything else?
No, like I said, we're 1 week out from the start of the draft, so we still got a few shows to record between now and then. We better get it done. We're running out of time.
That's true. All right. Find Keith on Blue Sky at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. The show is Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Find us on your favorite podcast platform, our YouTube channel. Hit subscribe, leave a comment, share it with your friends and family, and we'll see you next time. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.